Okay, I said I wouldn't do any more vlogs, and I didn't because there's no video in this, really. It's just audio. But I did want to talk a little bit about like why lobbying government doesn't seem to work. And ideologically, it would seem like I have an issue with government, which I do, but like it's more like government to me is superfluous, but that's neither here nor there. The Marxian explanation for it really is basically that the government is not just a class tool, right? The government is set up in such a way that now it is, they're basically like their own corporations with sovereignty. So um, the way a corporation, if they were looking at their numbers and they're saying, well, how do we increase profit? They would cut labor costs, right? So that's what we are. We're labor costs to them. This was the genius of Keynes, right? The genius of Keynes was basically like, hey, um, we can find or make or at least attempt to find productive outlets for capital if we cut labor costs across the board. And the only way to do that is to put monetary sovereignty into the hands of the government entirely, which is to say the entire economy. So they can make wage cuts across the board. They can devalue wages across the board, right? Whereas in a downturn, necessarily, like especially one the size of the Great Depression, not every corporation was going to be able to be capable of doing that. They wouldn't be able to just devalue wages, but a government can because it issues its own currency. That was one of the chief points of going off the gold standard as well. And so we're considered labor costs if you're even working. If you're not working, you're just considered pure cost above the reproduction costs of capital. So our reproduction costs are always going to be bare minimum, and whereas capital gets whatever it wants, basically, right? The needs of capital and human needs are not even close to one another, right? As a matter of fact, the needs of capital are so inhuman that uh, to mistake the two is I think a grievous error, right? And it's one of the reasons why like things like a mixed economy don't even make sense to me. You can't mix these two things together, right? One is always going to be dominant than the other because the beginning and end point of capital is fucking profit. It's money. It's to make turn more. It's to turn money into more money, right? Nowhere in the mix do like there's do human needs like get fully met there. They get lost entirely. Communities get lost entirely in that, right? And so our needs are being left basically on the altar uh, at the global level of the production for profit, or rather the production of surplus value, right? And so you see all this massive spending. You think to yourself, why isn't it going to us, et cetera, and so forth? Because you and I don't facilitate that. As a matter of fact, starving us is the better facilitation of that process, right? Because it eats into our consumption. The less we consume, the more capital can consume, the more the government can consume. That's why it doesn't work. And you say, well, why don't we change the government? Because it emerged this way. It's like saying, like, why can't we go back to a time when a star was in a different stage of its development? Because you can't. Right? The state has emerged this way. The only thing to do is to fucking get rid of it. Right? And on the basis of governments becoming more and more and more beholden to economic laws. Right? They can't change them. They can only react to them. Right? And begin to personify them more, right? And the government personifies the national and then the global capitalist. And then the health organizations are funded by these governments. They are literally NGOs and IGOs and stuff like that. But the broad takeaway is this: is that the government has emerged since 1929, right, as something that is completely stands above society, right? That is hostile to society now, that is not just a class tool like it was in the 19th century, right? Like an armed military suppressant of like working class uprising. It doesn't have to do that anymore. It just slowly starves you over time, right? And so when people see things like, wait, there's austerity happening, you also have to recognize there's also record spending happening, right? And that confirms my point that in order for the accumulation process to continue, they have to keep people just barely alive enough, right? So now imagine you're in a political economy where most of people are just barely being kept alive through the wage system, right? Now imagine trying to get another nickel out of that fucking government that is actively doing that. Okay? Bulldoze the entire fucking Washington to the ground or balance the budget. Otherwise, you are never going to see fucking any sort of kind of like massive surge in research for these illnesses or disability. And you're never going to see, it's not to be negative, I'm trying to tell you that the governments are not designed to do that. Even at its most aspirational levels of a uniparty, which would be the Chinese, Communist Party, and which does a lot of public investing for its actual public, it's still just fascism. Okay? Because they're the ones who control consumption. Whereas if we controlled our own consumption, we wouldn't have to even fucking ask this question.